Hi, everyone. This is Lauren Baker, founder of Search Engine Journal. Sorry about that. Welcome to today's SEJ webinar, brought to you by our partners at iQuanti. With me today, we have Wayne Chahansky. Did I get that right, Wayne?
Yeah.
Okay, nice. Wayne Chahansky, coming in from San Diego, the VP of Search and Site Experience at iQuanti. Hey, Wayne, how's it going?
Wonderful. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be back again.
Absolutely. So we were talking about before the webinar. I went through our old records, and iQuanti was actually, you guys were the first sponsor for an SEJ webinar back in 2021, 4 years ago. So right when we kicked these off. So it's nice to have you back.
That's crazy. Yeah. Good to be back.
Absolutely. So before we get things started, Wayne's going to start his presentation in a moment. Just want to give some of the stragglers a chance to kind of shuffle in. And just to let you know, Wayne's going to be presenting for a good 40 minutes or so, 45 minutes. Afterwards, we're going to have a live Q&A session. As Wayne is presenting, please feel free to ask questions within the Q&A box right within the webinar area. And then also you'll see that we have a chat area as well. So the chat area is a great location for everyone to chime in right now. Let us know where you're coming in from, whether it's San Diego, DC, London, Shanghai, wherever it may be. Just let us know, and it's a good way to get the chat rolling and a little bit of audience participation. Also, speaking about audience participation, you'll see that underneath the slides there are some emojis. So as Wayne is presenting, give him some support with smiley face, raise the roof, heart, whatever it may be. And we'll be having a poll about halfway through today's webinar. Wow, there's really a lot of people chiming in the chat right now. So we're going to have a poll during today's webinar about halfway through. Really encourage you to take advantage of that. We'll go over the results, and Wayne can craft the rest of his presentation accordingly. And on that note, I'll hand things off to you, Wayne.
Fantastic. Oh my gosh. I am having a blast just watching the chats come in from all over. The reach is fantastic. I just saw somebody from Poland, so you guys could probably pronounce my last name better than I could. So wonderful to see. Keep those coming. It's fantastic. We're going to jump right in, though. We have a lot of material to cover. I'm super excited. What a hot topic. I cannot tell you how much, of course, this is blowing up. AI, ChatGPT has been around for a little bit, but for some reason, there's always been this incredible surge just recently in the last few months. And as things are developing, I get to share with you what we've learned. And hopefully you can take some of this back. Open to a lot of questions. If I don't get to all the questions, I will absolutely try to go ahead and respond to all of them myself. It might take a little bit of time, but I do treasure each and every one of the question. I appreciate everybody's time for visiting here. So with that further being said, as Lauren had mentioned, I am Wayne Chahansky. I head up the global SEO program at iQuanti. iQuanti is a digital marketing performance agency headquartered out of the New York area with global offices from London to Canada, India, and kind of all over the world. So as we get here, SEO is one of our strongest areas. We do creative services, we do MarTech, we do analytics, but search and for SEO and SEM is one of our core business practices. Well, without further ado, let me jump right in. We have seen a transition from keywords to conversations. We keep hearing ChatGPT is conversation-based. We're looking at how search is happening. And what is going on is eventually, and I think that there's a little catch up from user behavior, especially at a B2C audience, not the power user that like maybe a lot of us are personally as a kind of the power user, but the regular type of conversation is going from search queries to search conversations. So for example, in Google, we might have typed in Italy travel, but now in ChatGPT, we're typing in what are the best places to visit. I have to plan a trip for 2 weeks. I want an itinerary. I want to hit some local tourism. I need to get a local pub in there. I want to try some great cuisine, so on and so forth. And it's going to spit out in a complete itinerary for you. That's a very different search experience than what we're used to. So what we're seeing is these keywords are definitely moving to conversations, and conversations are happening across different platforms. So one of the things that we had talked about in some past webinars was the fragmented journey, the fragmented search of the user journey. There's a lot of platforms, a lot of conversations happening. That is very relevant today as we look at what's going on. These conversations are taking place all over, from Google to Reddit to ChatGPT and any other third-party aggregators that might be in your industry as well. All roads, however, lead to organic visibility. When I talk about organic visibility, I've always been kind of a preacher in this from an SEO standpoint, that it's not just about the 10 blue links on Google. It is owning the entire journey. I have a cliche: if you want to own the user, you need to own that journey. And to own the journey, you need to have visibility across all of the platforms, across all the conversations. So let's really kind of rethink how we think about SEO and look at this more as a large global organic visibility across all platforms. Today is ChatGPT and Perplexity. Tomorrow it's mystery platform X that we just don't know about yet. So let's just kind of keep that in mind. The adoption rates of the LLMs and the AI as they go forward is significant. ChatGPT in the current landscape of all search platforms is about 5%. So Google is still the gorilla that it's always been. However, look at what ChatGPT has accomplished in just a couple of years. When you compare it to Bing's been around for 20 years, they've already surpassed all of the market. And ChatGPT plus Perplexity and Claude and other type of LLMs are actually the second largest combined together, surpassing YouTube as well. Growth rates, Q1 adoption for subscribers was in 400 million for ChatGPT. Now Q2, 700 million. So the adoption is significant. What we are seeing some early signs is that it's not so much taking away from search as it's adding to it. You're seeing more people kind of jump into that. And we'll kind of see that through some of the analytics here as well. A few level setting definitions I want to go through, especially as it concerns AIOs, LLMs, Gen AI, GEO. There's a lot of acronyms floating around. And really the Gen AI, the GEO, the AEO, all of that has to do with your large language models like ChatGPT and Perplexity. AIO is a search feature on Google, so that's still tied to Google. Now, when we look at these two, what they have in common is two definitions: brand mentions and URL citations. Brand mention is if your company name is mentioned in the answer result of either the LLM experience or the AIO experience. URL citations are mentioned from when your website is cited as a source file, being that it was part of that answer element that it drove the answers to. So if your URL citation comes in the LLM, you'll be a citation. AIO, it's also a citation. There's multiple citations per category, per industry, per query, and per answer. What we're seeing from the AIO standpoint in this data, we're actually looking at as I monitor footprints daily. This is kind of growing. Finance is typically the lowest end, so keep this directional. Healthcare is up on the upper end of AIOs that are present, but I am seeing this grow. Finance was 10 to 12%. Now I'm seeing it up to 30%. So often these numbers will probably be larger than what they actually are. One of the things that we did at iQuanti to kind of understand this, there's a lot of talk about AI, a lot of talk about geo, and a lot of kind of best practice and hypotheses out there. But until we actually understood what and how things worked, we weren't able to create a solution for our clients. So what we ended up doing is taking on our own kind of modeling exercise to get first-party data. And we analyzed 30,000 core head terms and then looked at all of the prompts and all of the URLs that surrounded that. So we looked at 5 to 10 prompts per query. We looked at over 250,000 different URLs. We looked across 30 different variables that were helped to prove out different hypotheses. So our data was about 7.5 million. Now, small comparison to everything, but it did give us some large directional elements. And those directional elements that we saw are correlation factors. What we're looking for in this modeling exercise is that 82% of the answer had this in common, 76% of the answer had this in common, 65% of the answer had this, so on and so forth. As we rolled that up, we found a couple key learnings from our modeling. One, the traffic and popularity of your domain at a domain level within its category saw a 4 times the boost or the answer elements that were present based on a popular domain versus an unpopular one. Number 2, your basic SEO foundational factors, relevant content, H1s, titles, all of those, 60 to 70% still in play here. So when I bucket the first and the second together, there's a lot of overlap from regular SEO. But what I'm going to do in this presentation is look at what's good for Google and what's good for LLMs so you can help understand some of the differences. Directionally, we're along the same path. However, there's a couple pivot points where we split off, and we have to do some variables different for the LLM models. The third bucket is we saw a boost in structured elements, content elements. For example, a table format over a list format. We saw about a 32% boost in structured content elements overall. Some good key macro learnings. When we got into the popularity of the website, now a couple of the lines of business that we were looking at, we're heavy into finance. We have a lot of clients in the banking and financial world. So one of our modeling was in the finance sector. 50 to 52% of both in the credit card and savings, different categories, saw a sweet spot that all the answer elements came from websites that had 1 million to 10 million visits per month organically in traffic. Now, every threshold for every category is going to be slightly different. So don't jump out of your seat thinking that your website's got to get a 10 million organic visits per month or else you can't get into LLMs. That's not the case, but the correlation factor that we're looking for is that your website has got to categorically be in the top 50 of the main brands as it looks to traffic and share of voice. So there is a correlation of that. Your threshold might be 50,000 per month, 10,000, 300,000, 5 million, whatever that is. There's a different threshold based on category, and that's based on competitiveness as well. Okay. But the correlation itself is your domain name has got to be popular and in a running of top category positions. This one's an interesting learning that we found as well. Brand mentions and citations go hand in hand. This whole screen is about your brand mentions, so your company name being in the result of the answer element itself. What we did in our data, we saw that if your brand was mentioned, but your URL was not cited as a source file, you only showed up 3% of the time, the chart on the left. If you had one citation, it boosted you up to, is that 40%? And then, of course, as you got into 2 or more, it gave you a much larger boost as well. So what we see the correlation here is if your content is being crawled, indexed, and sourced and used as a part of the answer element, as a source, your chances of being mentioned as a brand greatly increased for 2 or more source URLs. On the right-hand side was a complete different correlation. Still had to do with your brand mentions, but it has to do with third-party publications. So this is if your brand has not been mentioned in any of the third-party publications, then what you saw was only like a 2%, less than 3% chance that you were going to be mentioned. But if you did see that you had 1 or more brand mention in some of the publications, then you saw a boost. 2 or more, you saw even a larger boost. So the takeaway here is that your content needs to be scored and indexed and used as a source. And what you need to do is make sure that your brand mentions need to be in the publications that are happening on third-party websites. So there's 2 elements to this equation. Much like Google has relevancy and authority, LLMs have relevancy and citations. Okay. Basically how things work. Here's what we've learned. As we kind of dissected and looked at all the anatomy and all the correlations, we saw that the framework itself is very much like almost any platform, that you have 2 large elements, discoverability and the second being validation. Let me just go through discoverability and validation as it relates to Google, because we're all quite familiar with that. Your content needs to be relevant to the search query. It has to be matched on the search intent, and that needs to be indexed, crawlable, fast, all of the wonderful things that Google's looking for in order for it to be discovered. That needs to be, your crawlers have to get through there, it has to index, crawl, and it has to match the intent of the query. That's your discoverability on Google. Now on LLM like ChatGPT, same thing, your content has got to be crawled, indexed, matched, but the content's got to be relevant to the prompts, and those are a little bit different than just a single search query or a single intent. Now the validation part of the content on Google is we use backlinks. We have authoritative signals referring domains or trust factors that are coming in. It's an absolute must that we have to get those in order to elevate those. The domain level doesn't pass directly through to the page level or the category level. So we know that there's extra work that has to be done there. In the LLM, it's not backlinks, it's citations. In Google, it's non-branded, typically because you're trying to elevate a non-branded query. But in the LLM, it's branded citations. So slight difference in between the two. However, if we kind of tear apart this framework, it actually applies to a lot of things. Let's take a look at TikTok. TikTok is an algorithm that's been kind of a black box, very closed. No APIs are getting in there. And what's happening in TikTok that we kind of see is your content's got to be discoverable. So it's got to be matching. It's got to be on point and have to fall into their algorithmic features for discoverability. But the validation comes from time on page, time on video, for example. How much time are you spending on that video itself? So as we kind of look at these two type of frameworks, it really does apply to almost everything as an overarching. Of course, all of the individual tactics come into play as you start dissecting this. So the content needs to be matching and trusted. It has to be authoritative, and the URL's got to be indexed and ranked from a discoverability. The validation, you're going to have non-branded queries, third-party brand mentions, your engagement metrics, your influencing your publication websites. As we apply this to an LLM, I'm going to try to just give, it's much more complex than what I've tried to illustrate here, but as a basic knowledge, here's kind of what's happening. When you type in a prompt and you ask it and it says searching the web, what's really happening is it's going through all of the top, most popular, trusted sources, which is where that top 50 category comes in. And then it's going through the crawl depth of the ranks. What we're seeing is actually top 30 is falling into play on the top 30 ranks. And it's finding the right answer. So now let's say it comes up and it finds 30 different answers from 30 different ranks. But now which one's the right answer? Which one should come into the answer itself? Well, now it's using the validation and it's saying, well, if we have 30 mentions of this answer, but we go out and check third-party validations, not everybody is actually talking about all 30 of these in the same light, the same sentiment, the same value. So let's kind of pick and choose what's actually making the cut. And it's looking from a popularity standpoint that if this one brand name is mentioned over and over and over on third-party publications and they have the right answer in the discoverability, that's a match and it moves forward to the answer element. So again, it has discoverability and validation. Of course, there's a large logic engine in here. There's a lot of tasks, virtual agents that are happening. So there's a lot more going on. But at a basic level, it is looking at the content through the indexing, and then it's looking for validation from third parties. So discoverability, is your content relevant to the prompt? You have to understand what the prompts are and make sure your content's matching that relevancy, much like your people also asked. Is your page for that content ranking in a top position? I'm going to show you a slide next coming up here where it goes into detail on that. And is your domain a leader in the category or the space that you're in? That all has to do with discoverability. Validation is your brand mentioned in influencing publications? Do you have a positive sentiment that's happening across the net? Are you in the right conversations as they're taking place in the right platforms and the right kind of topics as well? So all of that kind of brings into play here. But that's a basic understanding of how they are working together. Real quick, I know that there's an answer question, and there's always a lot of questions about, will you get this deck? Yes, everybody will get the deck. If you have questions, you can reach out, and I'm happy to answer those as well. But just again, to reiterate, the deck will be distributed to everybody that wants it, and I'm here to answer questions as well. This is what we're seeing from an actual distribution of answer elements. This is a really interesting chart as we look at this here, is that 70% of all LLM answers come from the top 20, and then the top 30 rounds out the last 30%. What's interesting about this is in Google, for human focus, it's the top 3 links. As you can see in Google, 42% of all click behavior with that CTR curve, that's not this, by the way, this is for LLMs, but the CTR curve for Google is heavily weighted on the top 3. Matter of fact, the difference between second position and fourth position from a CTR value in Google is twice the traffic, twice the clicks from fourth to second. That's how much of a drastic cliff it drops off. However, LLMs are quite different. For example, ChatGPT is actually looking much broader across all of page 1 and into all of page 2 and even some of page 3. So if you look at the ranks 4 through 10 in the blue bar here, they're almost as high as third position. But collectively together, 4 through 10 is just as powerful as 1 to 3. So takeaway is, does your content need to be a number 1 ranking to be in the LLM? No, it does not. But you should be in the top 20, at the very least top 30. Of course, if you can be in the top 10, that's the best. But it does give hope to all of us that aren't fighting for that top number 1 slot. Now, of course, the 85% of the market share that Google holds in the SERP, you still need to be there on the top 1 to 3. So aspirationally, you still need to get there from a Google standpoint. But for LLM visibility, you don't have to be in the top 3. Page 1 to 2 and even page 3 will get you where you need to be. Okay. So that's a big learning here. Let's try to make some correlation factors to the LLMs as we look at this. Keywords from Google to LLMs, keywords is the same as prompts. So I type in Google, I type in a keyword, shorthand, Italy trip, traveling to Italy. But prompts, it's more conversational, same type of request. I'm heading to Italy, I want a 2-week itinerary. So it's just more in depth, especially as voice search becomes a little bit more relevant and into our platforms. These keywords are going to definitely go to long-tail derivatives of prompts and conversations. But the keywords is what Google has, prompts is what LLMs have. Search demand in Google. We all know different queries have X amount of annual search volume or monthly search volume. Well, prompts have conversation volume. I was working on a client the other day and I was looking at mutual funds, and the mutual funds had 148,000 conversations happening last week, and they had 3.3 million conversations happening year to date. I even knew which prompts were happening at what time and what day they were even being asked. So I have access to a lot of data that can get you into where you want to go. But the correlation between search demand is conversation volume. This is going to help your prioritization. So if you have to kind of look at all your prompts, look at all of your queries and your intents on which page and what topics do you want to go after, I would start sorting that by your conversation volume, because you know what's hot and what's not, what's being talked about. So that helps prioritization. Rank position in Google is very similar to getting a brand mention in an LLM. Now, it doesn't have a different CTR curve like Google does, but it is a correlation that your brand name is mentioned in the answer, which is one of the ultimate goals, plus the citation. The ranking URL in Google is much like the URL citation in the LLM. Now, you're going to get a referral traffic or click-through on the URL citations, and eventually, if the brand mentions get tagged as with an href link in there as well, you're going to get some referral traffic on that. What's interesting about the referral track, early findings, haven't released this, although with as many people have registered and are attending today, I guess I'm releasing it kind of right now, is that the conversion rate from LLM is much higher currently out of our clients that we're looking at than Google itself. We're seeing a 20 to 40% increase in conversion rate on LLM traffic versus Google traffic. However, let's put this in perspective. There's only about 1% or sometimes less than 1% traffic in the LLM as compared to Google. So of course, that is going to be a very different once you add scale to that. Number two, if we reflect on our own behavior, when I go to ChatGPT, I'm very task-oriented. I'm very objective-based. I am looking to accomplish something. I very rarely use it for research from a standpoint of I just want to know something. So my behavior is already shifted to more down funnel and acquisition focus. I'm looking for ChatGPT to do something for me. So my mindset is more conversion related or acquisition, kind of that down funnel as I'm even entering into the platform. So we think that's also characterizing to the higher conversion rate. But nonetheless, it's a plus. Look at your log files, look at your referral traffic, start tracking this, and kind of look at your conversion rates on your page to see how that's looking through your attribution and your analytics. The last one, correlation reviews on Google. Obviously in local, those are important. To LLMs, it's sentiment. Sentiment is across the board. All of the reporting platforms are showing sentiment values, positive or negative. Again, going back to my little visual illustration, we have 30 answers from the top 30 results. They're getting validated. As they're being validated, would you pick one of the 5 answers that need to come into the answer element as somebody that has incredibly negative sentiment and a very bad look on them? Probably not. Probably not the best result to show in there if there's such a negative sentiment around that. So you kind of want to monitor and look at that as we go through this as well, of what that's doing and how that's influencing overall. Okay. So here we're going to take a quick pause in the action. I know I'm kind of babbling and rambling quickly here, but I'd love to know from everybody else in the here, kind of where everybody's at in their journey from the geo or the LLM space. So which area is your top priority for improving AI visibility? Is it A, you need to improve your content, your page structure, and your schema? Or is it B, boosting domain authority and citations? C, scaling your Gen AI pages for readiness positions? Or not sure a consult or plan would really be helpful? You're still kind of embarking on that.
And Wayne, there's a little bit of delay on my end, but I'm seeing 44 responses so far. That's out of, what do we have, about 270 attendees today, 267. So I'll give everyone a little bit of extra time to fill out the poll as things come in. The results look pretty interesting on my side. I'm going to share them in a bit.
Wonderful. Yeah, we'll keep those going as they're coming through.
All right. So we have 120 plus responses thus far. And here's what we're seeing. About 62% are their top priority is improving content and page structures and schema. 26% boosting domain authority and citations. 7% scaling Gen AI pages for readiness. About 4% are not sure. So it looks like everyone basically has a priority that they're going after with AI visibility. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, interesting. You know, I think that the data actually mirrors a lot of what a lot of in-house teams can do from a capability standpoint. It seems like content and page structure and on-page elements always are kind of the first to attack, which you're not wrong, but there's definitely more to the equation than that. So again, when we're looking at this, you're going to want to bring that optimization not just for LLMs, but you're going to have to do it for everything. You're going to have to match the relevancy intent for Google. You're going to have to get the relevancy for PAAs, the AIOs, and the LLMs. So you don't want to shift your on-page completely just to an LLM focus, but you definitely want to have an and versus an or in that conversation. And you're going to need all of the prompts and that kind of understanding of that page and that topic so you can kind of bring in the relevancy of those prompts together. But after the prompts, your big heavy lift, just like in Google and getting the ranks, is going to be the validation or the authority and getting those citations. What's interesting about the citations here, kind of a little pro tip, if you will, is not every publication, it's not a blind like authority. You can just get a link from almost anywhere and it builds some sort of weighted authoritative metric. Of course, whether it's more relevant and higher domain, it gives you more weight, but every link kind of gives you some benefit. In the citations, it's very selective. Every category, every term, every prompt has got different citations it's going and looking for a validation. So you have to know what those are and you have to go after and be in those conversations. It's not a general across the board type of thing. So cool. Well, that's great. I'm glad that came in. Thanks for everybody taking that. It's always fun to kind of see where everybody's at. But with that, we're going to continue. The criteria, just again, to kind of go through, I think I just kind of mentioned some of this as I was talking through that. But if your discoverability comes some basic criteria, high traffic domain, top 50 within your category is definitely what we saw overall. High organic ranks, top 30, but I'm really leaning more in that top 20 mark because 70% of all the answers are coming from the top 20 ranks. And I think there's a question about rank position that I caught in my eye on there. Does rank position really matter? Not necessarily from it's not going to matter from 4th position to 6th position or 10th to 11th or something of that nature, but you just have to be in the range of that. So your ranks are going to have to be there. So when we look at SEO readiness, we're going to say, okay, well, how many of your URLs are actually in a top 20 rank, maybe top 30? Those are kind of sitting to be optimized and ready to kind of go there. If you have topics that aren't in a readiness position, you're going to have to build some authoritative value and get them into a higher rank to begin with before you can even kind of really get into an expectation of driving into the LLM answers. So high organic ranks need to be there. Your strong title and headline relevance, that your basic SEO is still in play. There's nothing changing about that. Same with your copy body relevance. And that relevance has got to be associated to the prompts. So don't change your search intent. They're all going to go hand in hand. Again, on the mutual fund category that I talked about, the page, the prompts were like, what is a mutual fund? How do mutual funds work? Different questions and derivatives, all about that. Same intent that match the same page. So you just have to kind of match those in the answer or the optimization block that you're creating in the content. Use of structured content and tables is definitely going to help. I have a theory on this. Of course, I don't know. This is Wayne's own idea here. But when I saw the data, the tables are pulling a higher boost than list formats. The only thing I could think of is when you're trying to scale and bring in and scrape large amounts of data, we love to see bots being able to extract data confidently and precisely through big data. And the only way to do that is through certain HTML tags. Schema is one of them. But a table property has got a starting tag, an opening tag in the HTML, and an ending tag. And I think that's very easy to grab what comes between those. And you just have to look from the beginning and the opening and what's ever meaningful in between there. It's easy to pull. So again, I think it has to do with pulling and scraping large data, which schema helps with that as well. We also saw a correlation factor between some technical core web vitals, specifically the INP and LCP scores. Every answer element that was in the answers from our study had a very strong INP and LCP. Now, it's interesting on this because I always debate with my team, is that a ride-along variable or is it a driving variable? To me, I think it's a ride-along because I don't think you're going to have high domain, a top leader, and have high traffic and good solid ranks if you don't have your technical kind of in play and check. But that's kind of still out. I would love to hear other people's thoughts if anybody else has measured that. But I think that correlation to me is a byproduct of being in those positions to begin with versus that's a driving force. I think if you had a crummy website and you had a great INP and LCB score, you're not going to magically show up in the LLMs. So that's where I'm kind of looking at that. The other factor that we're seeing that's a little bit different is content freshness. That is playing a little bit more than what we've seen in Google, for example. Some evergreen content in Google can last, years and still be ranking quite high. I saw a YouTube video that was 8 years old and still in the #1 rank. That's not the case for LLMs. Your content's got to be refreshed. They want to know that it's the best there. And I can tell you from an AIO or an LLM, but let's take an AIO for an example. When everybody's got a Me Too content and everybody's saying exactly kind of the same thing, how does Google figure out, well, what's unique about that? So if you're trying to kind of crash that party, if you will, and get into those AIOs, you might offer something uniquely different. Maybe it's a quote, maybe it's a data point, maybe it's something that you can add to the topic that not everybody else is publishing, and then you'll probably be expanded and that'll be brought into that as well. Okay. The second half of this equation of validation is you're looking at brand mentions across the aggregators, across media sites, across social sites, and the positive sentiment. Again, the trick to this one here is it's not a blanket approach across everything. What you're actually looking for is which publication is influencing that answer for that prompt. And they are different. For example, I looked at one where Reddit comes up. In one prompt, in one topic, Reddit was the #1 influencing publication. The next one I saw was the 4th largest influencer. And the next one I saw it was 23rd, not even in the top 10. So you cannot treat every publication equal. and they're not all going to be the same for each topic and each conversation, each prompt. So the trick of that trade is to understand where those prompts are, what publications are actually influencing those prompts, and how do you get yourself and your company name into those conversations. Okay. At iQuanti, what we do is we actually have a large PR team that we get the data. Our data team provides us, then our PR team works with relationships and actually gets our clients placed in those publications. If there's a media cost to do that, then we'll evaluate that as well. But we actively go out and pursue specific targeted publications that will help influence the answer elements that are being sourced as citations here. One of the things that's interesting is kind of looking at your landscape. What you should be able to do, almost every platform now, from SEMrush to BrightEdge to everybody, is tracking AIOs. So you should be able to track your AIOs. You should be able to track this on your dashboard and your monthly reporting. If you're not, I highly encourage you that you do that. What you're looking to track is a couple metrics. One, how many AIOs are being triggered from your footprint? Number two, how many of those do you have actually acquired? And ultimately, the third one would be, how many pages do you have fitting left that actually can be applied to the X amount of AIOs that are being triggered? So as we kind of look at that, what's important, why are AIOs important to track? Well, one, they actually influence your CTR curve. So they're pushing your organic rank, number one, down below the fold. We are seeing traffic being impacted by that. So you're going to want to measure that. If you're trying to understand why you have a traffic loss, but you're still in rank number one position and search volume has not changed, you may want to look at your AIO presence, because that probably pushed your rank one down below the fold. Number two, you want to look at that and see how much it's influencing month over month, quarter over quarter, to see if your footprint is increasing from an opportunity and the overall impact. Did you have 20% AIO coverage this month and now next month at 30%? As you look at that, you're going to see how that is influencing your overall footprint. Then as you measure against that, you want to see how many of you won or acquired on that. So in this particular example, we're saying that there's 27 pages that have, or 27 captured AIOs from 17 pages, but there's 43 pages in market that's available for 188 additional AIOs. Why that's important is to look, you don't have to create brand new content. These pages already exist. Everybody's footprint has got some page that is triggering an AIO, and all you have to do is modify and optimize that page, and maybe you have to get it into a higher authoritative position. But nonetheless, the workings is already there, and you can kind of work on that. That's a kind of a P1 priority, to kind of work on the page that's already there. That's the same thing with the page, the PAA. The PAA is something that, what's interesting about when we go back and we look at AIOs are affecting maybe 30% of people's footprints, but a PAA is actually affecting almost 98% of every footprint. The keywords triggering our PAA. So when we look at the visual screen, the people also ask, as you look at below the fold here, it's still above rank number one, and oftentimes it's between rank number 1 and 2 if there's no AIO. So the PAA is a huge area for impression share, brand awareness, thought leadership, and of course you do get some click-through as well. As I always say, this is not an or, it's an and statement. So you want the PAA and the blue link and the AIO and. You want to be greedy, you want and on everything. But here's an example. The query that what we're looking at is ETFs. The PAA is, what is an ETF? Well, when you look at the page copy that they won on, it matches that exactly. What is an ETF? The one that they did not win on, how do I buy bonds in Singapore? Well, this page is talking about what is a bond. That has nothing to do with how do I buy bonds in Singapore. So if this is the right page for them, which I'm not convinced it maybe is, but if it is the right page for them, they could add a copy in H2 snippet, so the partial indexing could go through and find that they added a PA question, how do I buy bonds in Singapore, as they're defining what is a bond. So you can add those in there. You want to be literal almost in the PAAs, add those content blocks in there. But this is a really good low-hanging fruit when you look at your content strategy as you evolve that. Everybody that you're working on page optimizations for should always include the search intent for Google. Now it should also include PAAs and AIOs. So when I look at a page like this, it's the and statement versus the or. You need to optimize it for Google. Yes, that's based on the search intent of the query. You also need to optimize it for the AIO and optimize it for the PAA. And of course, if you can, get the prompts and optimize it for the prompts for the LLMs as well. So your content is just getting larger from how you're strategically optimizing it. And it's just not just blindly writing content anymore. You actually have a very strategic vision of the anatomy of your content and how that should kind of unfold. Okay. The second part of this is the validation. As we look at the validation component of this, what we're really seeing is, for example, here is, can you give me examples of well-known mutual fund? This was a question, a prompt in the LLM. The answer came up with Vanguard and Fidelity. Well, when you track back the citations, you can see on MarketWatch was one of the influencing citations, and who's listed on there? Vanguard and Fidelity. So it makes sense as we're kind of looking at this. It helps support our business case that the citations are influencing the brand mentions. So again, this is just part of the equation of the validation. Here is another example. What are the best ETFs to invest into right now? Again, as we look at the answer, it's got a lot of different answers. Vanguard's another one in there. iShares is another one in there. SPDR is another one. All of them happen to be listed on the top US market cap page, where they're all listed as citations. So again, it's going out, it's finding the answer, and then it's being validated, and it's looking at the publications and the citations and saying, oh, these keep repeatedly finding and being located as we look at that over and over. Okay. Finally, as we kind of get to this point, what we're looking to do is track visibility. Now, we run these visibility reports. We'll run it for clients. If anybody here on the call would like an opportunity and they want a visibility report, reach out to us and we can do this. But really what we're trying to do is get a core segment of AIOs, PAAs, and then the LLMs. So this first sample is AIOs and PAAs, as it has to do with Google SERP. And what we want to track is things like your AIOs, your people also ask, your videos, your discussion forums. What you're going to find in almost every footprint currently, this is a very low visibility. So you're going to see positions available, and then whatever your competitor set is versus where you are, you're going to see typically anywhere from 1% to maybe 8 or 9%. I have hardly ever seen in the 20s or 30s, and I've never seen 50 or 60% across anybody's footprint. Not to say it doesn't exist. I just have not ever come across it. And I work with enterprise clients all day long. Some of the largest sites in the world is what we work with. And these footprints don't have this. So what this tells me is that strategically, people just have not put a lot of effort into their content strategy to go to this level. It's a way to get in deeper and kind of create content and strategically go after all these positions. So in a rare case, it's kind of a first to market opportunity where you don't get a lot of that in the internet today's day. But this is one area I think you could definitely do that. The second visibility report is one that we look across the LLMs. And what we can do is we can look, this particular one's like 832 core queries across the credit card space, 43 million in volume against those queries. And you can see I've anonymized the actual logos, but this was real data for somebody's, these 4 brands here. And what you're seeing is nobody's really killing it. They're not doing a fantastic job across the board. There's 3,800 brand mentions out of all of these query sets, and the largest person's got 657. And when you look at this, for example, the last logo at the bottom, 303 versus 11 on the URL citations, what that's telling me is, in this particular case, this data tells me that their content, they don't have enough content, or the content's not ranking high enough in a position because they don't have enough URL citations, but their brand strength is fairly good. and they're being mentioned on a lot of third-party websites like that Market Watch and the different market reports that they're seeing. So if you see data like this and they're completely mismatched, where it's not really aligned, it's typically, you can kind of diagnose this just as you can with ranked data and understand why traffic dropped. This is kind of showing us those type of tells as well. But we can track everything from ChatGPT to Perplexity and so on and so forth. And we'll look at the brand mentions and the URL citations collectively together. Okay. So with that, I get asked quite often, what's next? This is just a little fun slide. I'm sure everybody has an opinion. This is just an opinion. Agentic search, I think, is going to be the next big wave from when we look at what's happening next in search. It's going to be agents to agents communicating. I believe, again, my personal beliefs, just take it what it is. But I think that we're all going to have personal agents and they're all going to do our work for us. I don't think humans are going to go out and start doing a lot of reading in order to accomplish a task. I think the agents are going to do it. They're going to communicate with other agents. They're going to do all the bookings, the planning, the research, the analysis, the risk, all of that type of stuff's going to happen. And they're going to go across whatever platforms they need to and talk to what other agents they need to, bring those decisions and feedback back to you and your agent to have it represented. So in the end of the day, I think we're going to be optimizing content for the human. We're going to be optimizing it for the platform. And ultimately, we're going to be optimizing it for the machine. There are going to be different tags, different type of queries or markup language that's going to help the machines be able to read that quicker. So with that being said, I do have a QR code here. I have a lot of different webinars that I've given to. I have recordings online. They're all free for downloads. You're more than welcome to have any of them. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect and expand. I'll post things here and there. Happy to answer anybody's questions. I'm very approachable, and I love to share the knowledge. You know, what we're trying to do here is elevate the category of the SEO landscape and the search landscape together. So I don't need to hide anything. If I learn something or I can learn something from you, I'm all for it. So with that, I think we have some time that we can open it up.
Absolutely. We have about 13 minutes left. We have a lot of questions that came in. Anything that we don't do today, we're going to go ahead and email it out. Wayne, we're going to send you any questions that we can't get answered live, and then we'll send that out to all attendees along with the slides and the video and everything else, that all the good stuff that everyone's asking for. So first question came in from Al. Al asked, what tools do you recommend for looking at prompt and conversation volume?
Yeah, good. There's a lot of reporting tools that are kind of coming on the market now. We have some partnerships and relationships with some of these, but I can mention there is Otterly, there's Brandlight, there's Profound. These are three big ones that we use quite regularly that can kind of help get you the reporting and the information that you're looking for.
Great. Next is an interesting question from Richard. Do you think it's a good idea, especially for publishers, to charge AI engines like Perplexity for website content via the option that Cloudflare has rolled out?
That is a good question.
Are any clients doing it, or anyone you know?
Yeah, no, I haven't seen that. I think that personal opinion, I think that everything's moving so quickly. I think that's going to be hard to kind of rein that in, right? That there's so much free content out there. There always has been. And to start charging for some things, I think it's going to be a little bit difficult to reel that back in. We've seen explosions virtually overnight. The data sets and everything that we're doing are changing so rapidly. I think it would be difficult to change the model that you're seeing and experiencing right now.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll take the crawling and the traffic.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much I'm going to make, how many pennies I'm going to make charging, but we'll see. So how important, Brendan O'Connell. Hey, Brendan, how's it going? It's been a while. How important do you think LLMs.text are with implementing to show up on AI platforms?
Yeah, good question. This just came out in a recent conversation I had just a couple of days ago as well. Too early to tell, to be honest with you. I think I think that it could take off. I think it does make sense. However, we're getting LLM responses without it. So clearly the platform can do without it as well. So will it ever go to that point? I'm not sure. It could. Will it be something where they start influencing and manipulating it? Kind of how Google went away from the do follow and the no follow and the follow. Like they just said, listen, that's being a little bit too much manipulated. We'll understand and define the weight of it. So it's hard. But the robots TXT, the sitemaps, all of those, have stuck around for years. So it's very plausible. I guess the other answer is, at the end of the day, it's a little early to tell. I haven't seen it good, sway one or the other.
Gotcha. We have about 5 different questions about LLMs text in here. So left to be seen, really. Interesting question. Does a brand URL need to appear as a literal URL? Does a brand name that links to the URL count as a mention? So when there are mentions, does it need to be linked? Is there more value if it's linked? If the brand is in the URL itself and the URL is published on the page, does that help the brand as a mention? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's not the brand in the URL doesn't help from the citation standpoint. If we're talking clearly just on the publication side, the validation, it doesn't have to be linked. First of all, the brand mention does not have to be linked. We're seeing a lot of the brand mentions that are not. Again, it's just being correlated in there. So that's a difference between, in Google, it definitely has to be linked, get that authoritative signal. But in the LLMs, it just has to be mentioned. And then the brand name in the URL, I'm not seeing any influence, as it relates to the LLMs. In Google, the keyword in the URL does help in the domain name, but in the LLMs, there's no correlation that we found.
Gotcha. Next question comes in from Stephanie. Stephanie asked that you mentioned tables over lists. Do you have any data or observations of infographics over tables? And by infographics, I'm thinking there's 2 different kinds, right? Some that have text in them that's crawlable, and some that are just images that I guess have to be read, which I guess with Snap AI and Google, what is it? I forgot the name. Google Lens. Can be done now, right? So, what are your thoughts on that side?
It is. It's interesting. Well, one, before I get into my story here, I'm not seeing that right now. Tables are still more prominent over an infographic, but I am seeing, for example, I was doing something on ChatGPT the other day. I took literally just a small screenshot of something I think in my Outlook, and it recognized, it knew the version I was on, it knew the platform I was on, it knew my Mac I was on. I mean, it knew everything just from a little screenshot, right? So it's the power it's reading is significant. So could that change? Possibly. Right now, we're not seeing that it's giving a boost over it. The structured content elements does help. Same with like transcripts embedding into the YouTube, all of those things like the old tactics, those all still help on that. But yeah, we're not seeing that it's trumping over the tables at this point.
Gotcha. Very cool. Lauren asks, if you're finding content with negative sentiment, what is the best way to remove it from LLMs to influence connotation? And by, I'm not sure if removal or replacing, right? Is there a way that, I guess, from an online reputation management perspective, you can influence sentiment to go from negative to positive, especially for brand-oriented, not queries, brand-oriented conversations?
Yeah, Lauren, I think that you're right on that. That from the standpoint, if I was to read this question, I think there's 2 ways to interpret this. One, if my brand has got a negative sentiment, how do I change that and pivot it to help the LLMs recognize that in a positive light? And to your point, that's your brand reputation. You can flood the market on that topic in a positive way of different, whether it's releases or conversations or publications or being part of those conversations, kind of offset that. So if you have 1 or 2 negatives, but now you've influenced and created 10 more positives, the positive will outweigh the negatives. Or, are you saying, the question could also be interpreted, hey, I saw somebody answer in the answer elements, but they had a really negative sentiment. Can I report them to get that kind of removed out of there? I think that there is starting to be some reporting mechanisms part of that. But I think the first one's a little bit more important of, can we monitor and manipulate our brand reputation? And I think that's an absolute yes. It does take some effort. But Lauren, you're spot on as well.
Yeah, especially what I'm noticing with LinkedIn with some different categories is incredibly powerful. And then also, of course, like, third party write-ups and reviews. Next question that comes in, Another one from Lauren. Are you finding a lot of hallucinations and AI prompt potentials? All tools our company has tried have been inaccurate.
Is there any clarification on what do you mean by hallucinations in the AI prompt, like false prompts? What I'm sorry, I understand that.
So, but what we could get a little bit deeper into is like, I guess, hallucinations and prompt responses as well.
I think it's getting better. I mean, there was, I think there were some funny things early on in the models where you can ask ChatGPT, what year did we send the first monkey to the moon, and it came and reported a year, when that never actually happened. But the GPT-5 model, as that is being has released now, the 5 model is smarter than every PhD that's out there at that level. That we're just not seeing those type of false answers as much as they used to, and that's going to continue to change. Give it more 3 months. I think that the CEO had mentioned of OpenAI had mentioned that anybody born in today's age will never be able to outsmart an AI at this point. That it's going to surpass everything. So even collectively, yes, right now you can still kind of outsmart, humans can kind of outsmart it where we're at, but very soon it's not going to be that way. So I think the accuracy to get to that point is being dwindled down, that we're getting a very strong accuracy with this. It's nothing the way it was when it first launched.
Gotcha. About a couple of questions that came in about specific industries. So the first is, are there any tips in optimizing an e-commerce product catalog for product discovery queries? Should you expose a public products feed, a special markup aside from the normal schema, content structure, etc.?
Yeah, this is a great question. Matter of fact, it's probably too long of an answer to answer here. But if you email this to me, Noah, I'd be happy to talk to you, because we do a lot of e-com as well. And in the e-com, we definitely look at things slightly different. You have transactional content, which is your store structures, your CATs, your subcats, and your PDPs. And then when you get into the DIY or the informational content and how that connects the dots to those. But there are tips and there are things that we can do to help kind of those queries. So maybe I'll follow up in an email with you on that one.
Great. And the next industry-specific question comes from Alan. Alan asks, what's the most effective way to increase organic and AI visibility for a large real estate company that hasn't necessarily focused on content production and site optimization? Sounds like we should probably get started on that part. Would first play be creating helpful content and increasing domain authority?
Yeah, it does. I mean, one, you have to, the chicken or egg, you have to have the content and market. That's got to be the first part of that. And you have to be relevant across the journey. So what we typically look at when we create content strategies is, I look at the customer-centric focus. I look at the product journey. So in that real estate company, what does that journey look like? What are people looking at? Understand that the data science behind that and the topics that are for that. Now, you can have two things. If your focus is just LLMs, for example, I would probably go after prompts right away and figure out what content, how many conversations are happening across what topics, and then develop content around those. But typically, you're also going to want the Google placement on that as well. So I would typically start with the content production, of course, match that, develop it all out there, and then you're going to have to get those into a readiness position. So if they're not in a top 20 ranking position, you're going to have to build authority to that to get them there. Your domain authority will follow suit automatically as a byproduct, and your categorically as your domain will be in the top if you're getting all the ranks in the top. But you're going to have some foundational legwork to be done first in order to even be in that readiness position for the LLMs to do that, because it's that kind of two-part thing. But I would definitely start with building all that content and getting to rank first.
Great. And we have about a minute left. So this is the last question of the day. Just as a reminder, Wayne will be following up with answers to a lot of the questions we haven't had a chance to get to today. What is the best approach for optimizing for query fan out? Could you go over query fan out a little bit, and then any recommendations you have on that side?
Yeah, that one I wouldn't mind following up with an email as well, because it's going to be a little bit longer than the 30 seconds we have left. But another great question as we kind of go through there as well. So if we can.
Awesome. Yeah. So get ready. You're going to have a lot of questions coming your way.
Yeah, no, I love it. I'm really happy for everybody's support, and the questions are great questions. And hopefully somebody learned something and got a takeaway or an idea.
Awesome. And then before we sign off, again, this QR code, it's right on my screen. I almost took a picture of it. Where is this going to take our attendees today?
This will be to that Quantity website in the webinar for myself. And you can just download any past webinars if they're interested. I have things about content strategy, about fragmented search journeys, all kinds of different things in there. So if there's something meaningful, go ahead and download it, use it. And yeah,
nice. So I'm gonna check out your TikTok after this. So hopefully there'll be some
I might be an old one. I should probably take that off.
All right, Wayne Jahansky, it's been a pleasure having you today. The team at iQuanti, thank you very much. Very informative webinar. And thanks for all of those who are still with us and have attended today. See you at the next SEJ webinar. Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye.